Please join me in welcoming Harry Dobbs, who will be discussing toward culturally smart destinations. Please, Harry, the floor is yours.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you for the invitation to come and introduce our work here today. And I think it's a real pleasure, especially because one of the theme of the conference as a whole of human-centered design and urbanism is something really close to our hearts. And also, quite evidently, here in Georgia, it's being part of a debate at a really, really good level, as epitomized by Nicholas, who just spoke. Really beautiful, tactical, urban work. So, going on to ourselves, I'm Harry from Harry Dobbs Design. We are architects, urban designers, and product designers. And we start really with looking at place and learning from context as the starting point for any transformation that we look to engender. So, be it social, be it environmental, be it cultural, we start with context. And to do this, we look at identity, we look at curating identity. So not just embedding new identities into spaces, but managing and navigating existing identities and how they react and relate to new interventions that we bring in, a sort of curatorial approach at different scales. And at the core of our focus is creating experience, and the idea that we start with the city and the people who live in it, the people who visit it, the people who activate it, really. So the city as an unfolding social and cultural event around which we look to create a physical embodiment. And as I said, we start from the scale of the artifact and work up to the scale of the city and vice versa, as product designers and urbanists and architects. And at the human scale, we get involved with a lot of the products and urban furnishings that populate a lot of our public spaces throughout the cities, creating not only things we touch, we sit on, we integrate at a very human scale, but also they create identities that flow throughout the city. And we then work up to how these elements come together to sort of create the streets and spaces that connect and engage within our cities at an architectural scale, at a street scale, at a public space scale. And then all the way up to strategic urban space and how the role of infrastructure plays a role, not just in engineering our cities, but how it gives identity, how it creates and expresses our culture, especially in the contemporary world. That's brought us and given us the privilege of working really in quite a few places across the world. Of course, in Europe, I'm from London, in UK and in France. More recently, we've been working in the Middle East, in Qatar and Saudi Arabia. We've had the opportunity to have some work in America, in Taiwan, and most recently now in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan. And really that's given us an insight into some of the aspect that I mentioned in the panel discussion, this idea of scale and pace of contemporary urban development and the challenges that throws up for us as designers. Urban designers, architects, and even urban product designers. And there's a paradox that we find in the projects that we encounter in a lot of contemporary development, not all, but a lot of it. And this idea that there's a top-down dynamic to it very often, and we often are working really within an economic and financial model, an infrastructural model, that really excels at making spaces that are very accessible, accessible to more and more people. That's what the financial models are built around. And more and more people at greater and greater speed. So there's this dynamic that this model really does well at. However, alongside that, we increasingly encounter an experience aspect, a pushback where people quite often express that these places don't feel real, they don't feel grounded, and an expression that people want to spend their lives in places that are more cultural and authentic is often a word that is lost in these environments. And it sort of goes to the heart of the conference theme, this challenge that we're dealing with, and the idea of this model that is really good at access, it's really good at creating capacity, efficiency, and speed. And how do, within these fast-paced, large-scale developments that a lot of our cities are moving into, how do we create these human-centered qualities and unique experience that are the fundamental of meaningful identity in cities and give us a sense of soul and the things that we really, I mean, we know we love these kinds of spaces in our cities. And so around these challenges that we've been encountered through these projects, we've slowly been sort of developing and trying to articulate a way to deal with it. And something we've been looking at is around the idea of culturally smart development. Obviously, smart development has had a lot of something from about 10 years ago. It was very technologically driven, and it missed this cultural element. It missed this human dimension. And so we're really looking at this aspect that targeting the issues we know plague fast, large-scale development programs, and how to push them more to a more socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable approach. And harness the power of enterprise and innovation and advanced design and manufacture in those approaches. And to do that, really, we had to sort of think about where we sit as designers within this context that's far bigger than us. We realize that. There are these top-down strategies that come all the way down from higher level national government. They might be geopolitical strategies, or they might just be national planning strategies. And how we can find, as designers, tactical solutions to connect that to outcomes that achieve this human-centered approach. So starting with these strategies, we realize we sit within infrastructural strategies. We sit within these national cultural strategies, these economic strategies. We realize that increasingly where the problem lies is in the gaps between these strategies. So where you have an infrastructure strategy that ignores the cultural strategy, we end up with inhumane infrastructure. It's inhuman, it's engineering-based. It doesn't engage with the culture and the human scale aspects. Where we have a cultural strategy that doesn't engage with an economic strategy, we end up with culturally alien environments that are just driven by the economics of supply chains, wherever they come from, and however alien they might be. And that gets onto the gap that we find between economic strategy and infrastructure strategy, where an imported supply chain generally will create these, or help drive this sense of alienating environment that has no connection to place. And we started to look at the tactical solutions we can employ to find a connection between these strategies and a people and place-based outcomes. So in between economic strategy and infrastructure strategy, an incubator accelerated supply chain, something that grows supply chain locally. Between infrastructure strategy and cultural strategy, a culturally smart infrastructure, something that connects to the people as part of the infrastructure, not just the engineering. The cultural strategy and economic strategy can come together to create what we call provenance-based innovation driven out of that place, and that has a unique aspect and an innovative aspect to its core. So just to sort of unpack that in a few of the projects we've dealt with this in, firstly looking at culturally smart infrastructure. And to do that, I'll just focus on a project we did in Riyadh. It's a project looking at the 41 square kilometers of neighborhoods at this pace and scale that we spoke about. And how these car-driven environments can be looked at and re-engineered as Riyadh develops as a city and looks to create a more human-scale environment. And it was looking at really how an existing urban model built around the car, built around 6-lane highways surrounding 2-kilometer blocks, with 2-lane highways penetrating right into the center, dividing it into kilometer square blocks, sub-blocks, how this model had created a very alien environment could be rebuilt around the lives of everyday people. And it took a matter of looking at mobile phone data of movements around these neighborhoods to analyze day-to-day movements from school, park, to mosque, from house to house, and how also combining that with a parametric model, we could develop a way of understanding where new optimized routes could happen for pedestrianization within Riyadh in these typical blocks of the Riyadh urbanism. And it started to have, as you can see, a complete redefinition of the block where movement and flow of people at the sub-layer start to drive a totally different dynamic to the block, where it also starts to drive different places where you start putting retail and other facilities, and the mix of urban positioning of different typologies starts to drive off that. Of course, that in places like Riyadh, that part of that is the climate, understanding what was originally understood as impossible, that people would wander around in Riyadh in a pedestrian way. In fact, it's not too different from Phoenix, Arizona in America, where in 6 months of the year, pedestrianization and cycling is quite normal. And also, even at the sub-layer, understanding how movement around the city is defined around shadow. And that becomes, again, part of the parametric approach to where we might invest in public space and routes. And it started to develop the groundings for a toolkit of urban elements and public space transformation that changed what you see on the left, a complete public realm desert or human desert, into places that become a cultural infrastructure for the city, a place that drives community engagement, actually changes how people in Riyadh interact. Previously, there was a lot of control between different, for young people especially, who would go from house to house only in cars, especially young women actually. Now, within pedestrianized environments within their neighborhoods, obviously you get a whole different set of interactions that open up. And actually, for places like Riyadh, incredibly radical in some ways. The second aspect I want to touch on was provenance-based innovation, the idea that you can draw on the qualities of a specific place to create unique innovations, unique ways of, methods of doing things in response to that environment. And I'll touch on a project we looked at it was in Doha. It was the redevelopment of the city center of Doha for the Musharrab, it's 31-hectare site. And it looked at understanding vernacular legacy within that context, integrating it with advanced design and manufacture to evolve a new form of contemporary material culture for Doha, for Qatar. That was their agenda. They tried several development forms that had developed quite universal urban environments that could be found anywhere in the world, and they wanted to articulate a Qatari national identity through their urbanism. So this was a way of looking at that and combining that in a progressive way relevant for the 21st century. And it happened on the urban scale. It took this old city center. It learned from the urbanism of that, the narrow walkways that give shade from the sun, and built into a new master plan that was developed by ACOM and Al-Azhar Morrison, actually. And we came in and worked into that master plan, understanding and looking at the spaces between the buildings and the public realm, reconceiving them as external rooms for furnishing, much as an empty room might have be very hard to understand what you do in it. As soon as you put the furnishing in, it activates it. You know if there's a dining room table and chairs, you know it's a dining room. You know how to activate it. Similar furnishing starts to have this tactical role within the city. And it looked to evolve the design from the existing vernacular and legacy to create a whole new range, really, of products for the city. About 3,500 went in, of lighting, of security bollards, drinking fountains, cycle racks, benches. The whole sort of suite became this furnishing of an external interior set of rooms, really, for the city, creating this landscape that activated this new urban development. And the furnishings, really, they sit between that landscape layer and the architectural layer to provide something that has iconography, but also really supports the human environment. The third theme, really, is this idea of incubated, accelerated supply chain. And I'll touch on this on a project we worked on in the south of Saudi Arabia. It's the NEOM project. Sits on a desert area adjacent to the Red Sea. And really, we were looking at the NEOM region, which is about 26,000 square kilometers of desert, within which they are building 4 cities. And they really had a problem of how, if we're building these cities, how do we deal with all the infrastructure that these cities will kick out into these rather beautiful desert environments? They're big cities of millions of people, and with that goes a lot of infrastructure. And really, it was looking at a bespoke camouflage strategy for infrastructure within deserts that, in a funny way, had a contradiction at its heart. It needed also, being discrete, it also needed to express NEOM as a place. So we looked on this idea of beautiful things that disappear in deserts. And part of that was starting, as I said, with the experience, starting with how people move around these deserts. Are they cycling? Are they moving at the pace of a car? Are they coming at a different perspective of an eVTOL 3,000 feet at pace? And looking at how we can understand how to develop a bespoke language for all the infrastructure within that context of experience. And we started around 3 tactics, really, of a biomorphic skin, an optical illusion technique, and building out of the mineral aspects of the desert, elements of the desert, to enclose assets like this 100-meter wide water reservoir tank, the typical thing that's quite unsightly in deserts. Just to unpack those tactics, one of them was a digital mirages. It was looking at an optical approach of mixing color that up front can be very vibrant, and as you move away, can be tuned to disappear or merge into the background of the desert at certain distances. You can be quite technical about it optically. It sort of combines the ideas of pointillism, but also a similar thing that happens on a TV screen in a way of color mixing. Part of that, we developed an integrated sort of approach to the supply chain of it, and looked at incubating a way of delivering these optical patterns on buildings in a technical way, in a robotic way, with an Estonian company that was nascent at the time, and now are involved with NEOM at delivering these aspects at scale. So unique to NEOM in a way, developing an industry around it. The second tactic was a mimicry of the landscape, really, by learning from animals that had spent 3,000 years assimilating to these desert environments, be they reptiles, be they birds, incredibly beautiful, sophisticated means of camouflage. We looked at understanding that and developing a machine learning tool to develop unique new patterns, evolving further from this, unique for NEOM. And the third tactic, that is back. And around that, a construction technique, again, which had a supply chain connected to it, a systemized approach. And the third tactic really was building out of the fabric of the desert, the earth of the desert. Of course, that has a way of merging into the background. So around these 3 tactics, of merging into the desert with the fabric, obviously there's 3D printing of earthen structures, rammed earth, and berming and such like. And around these 3 tactics, we developed an integrated design language for the region, all the way from 2 kilometer sort of by 4 kilometer train depots, electrical substations, to even the things that go everywhere in these environments: fences, security bollards, shelters, visitor infrastructure. And really, I just wanted to leave it as a question in terms of this, how in Georgia, what are the tactics that might be employed in Georgia really to meet this need for people and place-based outcomes in relation to these broader strategies of infrastructure, culture, and economy? What would the Georgia solution be? How can it do it in a way that builds its innovations and skills through innovation uniquely drawn from Georgia? How can it incubate a supply chain that doesn't just draw an international supply chain, but starts to develop that in Georgia and does it in an enterprising way? And how can it build up a culturally smart infrastructure that really looks at the human scale aspects as much as it does the engineering to build a new sense of destination in Georgia? It's a question, as someone who's only just come to Georgia for the second time, it's a question we are asking, and it's a question I pose. Thank you.